Hello and welcome to another episode of Father and Joe. I am Joe Rockey here with Father Boniface Hicks. And Father, as I teased in the end of the previous episode, we are in a country now and really globally that is experiencing more loneliness than ever has been before. Granted, it might be a hard thing to measure, so it might be a little ostentatious to say that statement, but you certainly can detect that there is a wide array of people that are feeling lonely in a way that hasn't been before. I believe personally this is a byproduct of two major things. Maybe it's the same thing, just splitting hairs. The first being the way that we receive information from each other no longer being the same or uniform because of the nature of algorithms and feeds in our phones. And the second being the way that we go out and essentially do dating now. If you're doing it online, it's basically a 3-second observation and then swiping one direction or the other. That's essentially what modern internet dating is. So I bring this up because being lonely is, in a sense, a failure of being in quality relationships. And one of the things that we talk about a lot, because it is the gateway to all of the greatness of the gospel, is relationships. So I really kind of want to hammer into this situation, not condemning anyone for being lonely. We all get there sometimes. But how do, when we're in that space of feeling lonely, of getting out of it when it feels like I have absolutely no one I can rely on. My phone keeps making me feel worse, but I'm also addicted to it, so I can't stop feeding it. How do we get out of this cycle and into a pathway of creating meaningful relationships? And quite frankly, how do you even try to do that when the only way I connect with people is through the internet?
Well, and there's nothing fundamentally wrong with connecting to people through the internet, of course, and
Mhm.
that can be very fruitful. You and I have a lot of connection through the internet,
Fair
for
enough.
example, and that's worked pretty well overall. Um, so, but your point about the uh, fundamental necessity of relationships for the thriving of our humanity. Maybe it's just simplest to start at that point. We cannot grow as human beings without what kind of relationships? Well, let's just call them Christ-like relationships in the sense that relationships of real trust and mutual love, in which I can share my life with somebody or parts of my life with somebody, that I can share my heart, my experience, that I can receive from the other, um, about that experience, about what I shared, or receive from the other also his or her own experience, and to really enter into bonds of love. So, relationships that are marked by bonds of love. Uh, Maybe that's enough way to describe it for now. And those relationships are really essential for my thriving. I like to say relationships of affirming love too, where affirmation is not just saying nice things about a person, but affirmation at the level of affirming the goodness of a person's existence. You are good because you are, and I acknowledge your goodness. You are a gift, and I experience that gift in my life, and I show you and help you to experience that gift by the way that I respond to you and love you and support you. So we need that kind of those relationships of affirming love in our lives. We need them in an absolutely vital way as infants, as toddlers, as children. It is formative of our person, of our personality, of our capacity to love and to receive love. It's absolutely builds the foundations for our whole emotional life and sets the stage for so many things. None of us received all that we need. All of us are on a spectrum of deprivation, we might say, And some of that can also be recovered in later relationships. But in an ongoing way, we need those relationships of affirming love, people who are blessed by our existence and help us to experience that. And being in those relationships, not just relationships of utility, you do something for me, I do something for you, but really relationships of communion, of deep connection at the level of the heart. So we just need that. And then, so what if we don't have that, or we don't have all that we need? What does it look like to be relationally hungry or even relationally starved, to be relationally deprived in our lives? Well, one of the consequences of that can be loneliness, as you're setting up our episode, that we can experience loneliness, the pain of feeling that there is no one who understands me. There's nobody who's in it with me. There's nobody who will hold this pain, this struggle, this experience with me. There's nobody who will support me. And that loneliness um, can be more pervasive. I might feel that in an ongoing way. And one of the problems is that as I feel lonely, it has a way of isolating me more. And then sometimes some other behaviors can come out, either behaviors of collapsing in on myself or behaviors of acting out in certain ways. And that can end up driving people away from me even more. So it can become a negative feedback loop that the depressed become more depressed, that the lonely become more lonely, that um, the frustrated become more frustrated,
Mhm.
that the symptom leads to intensifies the condition that produced the symptom. So those negative feedback loops are really dangerous. And it's also just a little side note. I seem to remember our discussions along the way, with me advocating for people who are low functioners or low performers, or people who are struggling to keep an apartment or keep a job or something like that, that sometimes they need a little extra help. So it's not all their fault, or that is to say, someone needs to enter into that negative feedback loop to help break them out of it, by giving what they sort of, it's almost they're like pushing you away, and you almost have to give them what they're saying they don't want. In the process of giving it to them, it'll put them in a posture of receiving it more readily. But you
Mhm.
almost have to, push upstream to break some of those negative feedback loops. Back to the point about loneliness and relationships, and where we go with that. So loneliness is one of the symptoms. I think there are really a lot of symptoms of the lack of relationships, of the breakdown in society and relationality and mutual affirming love and commitment and friendship, and all of these different ways of saying that same thing. Uh, I think a lot of the things that we spend time on politically, really, I just mentioned like homelessness or unemployment. I think that's often a symptom of a breakdown in relationships. I think a lot of the sexual issues that we wrestle with, and whether it's pornography or whether it's maybe homosexuality or transgender things, or I think a lot of times those are symptoms of breakdown in relationships. I think indebtedness and overspending and drug abuse, and a lot of these symptoms that take a lot of our energy trying to find political solutions. And the symptoms do need to be cared for. So um, hear what I'm saying. Don't hear what I'm not saying. The symptoms do need to be cared for. These are things that need to be addressed. You can't just say, well, we have a bunch of migrants coming into this country because their own countries have a major breakdown in relationships. So we should reject migrants and work on relationships. Well, we should work on relationships. That might be a little complicated within the next 4 generations in another country, actually turning the tide on that. In the meantime, we do need to deal with people and manage that situation in some way. So
Mhm.
we do need to find some approaches to handling symptoms, but uh, that shouldn't distract us too much from also handling causes. And so all of that is a broadening. Then to come back to one of the ways we might notice this lack of relationships in ourselves could be loneliness, could be an indicator to us that even if we're surrounded by people, even if we're in the middle of city streets, even if we're working a good job, um, even with a marriage and children, a family, sometimes we can experience loneliness, and that's a well, and as you said, it could be a variety of things. It certainly isn't something we should blame, but maybe there's a quality of our relationships that's lacking, and are, are we as vulnerable? Is there someone that we can share more deeply with? If we look at the loneliness, what is it saying to us? Is it saying something like, nobody really gets you? Well, what specifically about my life? Well, nobody gets the way that you invest yourself for others, or nobody gets the things that you think about. Nobody gets your love for creativity and beauty. Nobody gets, so we can even be more specific. Are there areas of my life that I'm having a hard time sharing, that I feel like I'm all alone in, that nobody understands me? Uh, or sometimes do I feel rejected or wounded or abandoned in a way that has driven me into a corner, so that I feel like after being rejected by somebody I really trusted, now I'm afraid to open my heart to anybody about anything. Well, in that case, I need to look at that wound that's been inflicted, and how might that be treated, uh, tended to. So, so anyway, I've said a lot of things now. We can go in a number of directions, I suppose, in talking about loneliness.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of important things there to recognize. A, this is something we can control to a certain degree. We talked in the last episode about how sometimes things seem so big that they're almost magical that we can't address them. We can't even approach them. And I gave a simplistic business example of how to get on the front page of Google without spending money. That seems like a monumental hurdle for a lot of small businesses. Trust me, you're my clients. I know how it is. So when we look at this and say, it can seem so monumental and difficult to just start a relationship because you're coming from a natural space of pain. And you gave great examples about how, because you're living in fear due to the pain, you can create symptoms intensify, making tomorrow worse than today, by falling within yourself or doing the other extreme of acting out and doing damaging behaviors in that regards. So how do we find that rope to pull us in a direction that's to the middle, that's to, all right, I'm no longer going to keep falling in upon myself. I'm going to do something that will pull me into a chance of having a relationship, even if the most important relationship of my life just broke. Um, I mean, let's be honest, a lot of this does stem from when you're in puberty and all your hormones are changing anyway. And, most relationships when you're between the age of 16 and 20 don't last. That's a statistical fact, at least when you're talking about dating relationships. The question being, when we look at our past and seeing the relationships not working at our puberty state, the foundation of what our adult, minds really were anchored in, and all we see is failures and not a foundation of seeing victory. How do we change today so that we're not, for lack of a better word, driving over the rumble strips of problems over and over again and wondering why our car keeps breaking? How can we build this up to be better?
Um, yeah, the regularity of failure in our teenage years is a good thing to point to. I always like to remember that in the teenage years, we want to practice being adults. So that's kind of where our natural desires, our developmental stages. And so we're practicing having adult relationships like dating, you mentioned, those romantic relationships, and the vast majority of those break down. So our practice is actually good practice if it fails, and we have someone to help us with it. You learn a lot through that. I certainly learned a lot through dating. A lot of my own limitations. I learned that women are different from men. That was a great discovery, and think differently and act differently and have different expectations, and different people are just different from different people. I didn't care maybe to figure somebody out or whatever as much until I had a vested interest of having a girlfriend and trying to date well and whatever. But so those experiments, that practice during the teenage years, of course it's going to run into difficulties and failure, like all practice does. And so we shouldn't be surprised by that. But then we need the adults in our lives that we can share those things with. How much teenage relationship practice is supported by the wisdom of other teenagers, and who come up with stupid things. Somebody was telling me he had a student say to him, "I'm not going to give respect to somebody unless they respect me." It's like, well, that's going to be a problem, because if that guy has the same attitude, nobody's ever going to respect anybody. Like, somebody's got to start that process. But this is a vice principal who heard this same phrase several times over the course of a week. So it's going around the school, this relationship advice from the high schoolers. This is the profound wisdom that the high school community has come up with. So we need freedom to practice, and we need trustworthy helpers when our practice goes south. And we need to keep having a positive feedback loop and the right attitude. It's not like we get one shot at these things and then our whole life falls apart. So there are going to be some struggles around that. And then the reality is, how many of these high school students don't have parents at home who are actually there to listen to them, or other adult figures who care enough about their life or really enter into their life? Probably a lot of them don't have that. And that's at another level that we have to encourage our friends, colleagues, neighbors. Are you taking time with your children? Are you listening to their struggles? Do you need help with your children? Is there some way that I can step in? So there are just so many layers that we need to convert, that we need to heal in order to turn around this tide of relational deficiency, you might say.
And we do hope that listening to our podcast here does help with that. Relationships are obviously certainly a major topic that we discuss a lot here. And if you know anyone that's going through these problems, we invite you to explore our archives. We have discussed this topic in a lot of different areas and a lot of different nuances throughout the years. So we invite you to continue listening. Feel free to go through any of the archives. We do not charge for any of our episodes ever, nor do we have ads upon them for that matter. So we enjoy you and invite you to continue to listen. If you've not done so yet, please click subscribe and share us with someone who could be in need of this episode. So thank you very much.